Well, let us begin. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Secretary of State debate, co-sponsored by the Washington County Public Affairs Forum and the Washington County League of Women Voters. I'm Brad Avakian, Forum President. Since 1956, the Forum has promoted civic engagement by helping our neighbors know more about the candidates and the issues before them. With events just like this. On behalf of the board, we want to thank both the candidates and all of you for joining us tonight. Kathleen?
Can I mention, my understanding was that there was not going to be a political sign behind the person speaking. But maybe I was mistaken.
There's no rule about that. And Kathleen Hersh, if you are there, why don't you welcome everybody and then we'll begin.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Hersh with the League of Women Voters. And I just want to remind everybody, for more information about candidates and measures on your ballot, to go to the League of Women Voters online voters guide, vote411.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And we're also very pleased to have Eric Schmidt as our moderator tonight. Since 2016, Eric has served as a communications and public policy consultant. He was the communications manager for the Association of Oregon Counties, but of course, we all know him as our longtime and trusted news anchor of KOIN and KPDX TV. Eric, thank you so much for agreeing to serve as moderator tonight.
My pleasure and my honor, Brad. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Kathleen Hersh. You do a great job with the League of Women Voters. And basically, to put the record straight, I am a dues-paying member of both the Forum and the League. I want everybody to know that. So let's meet the candidates for Secretary of State. Shemia Fagan is the Democratic and Working Families Party's candidate. Nathalie Paravicini is the Pacific Green and Progressive Party's candidate. And Kim Thatcher is the Republican and Independent Party's candidate. The rules of the road tonight, candidates. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to make an opening statement, telling us a little bit about themselves and why they are seeking to be the next Oregon Secretary of State. After each candidate has had the opportunity to introduce themselves, then each candidate will have an opportunity to ask a question to another candidate. The questioned candidate will have 2 minutes to respond, and the questioning candidate will have a 1-minute rebuttal. When all three candidates have asked their questions of each other, then we will open the questioning up to the members of the Forum and the League. Candidates will have 1 minute to respond to the Forum and League questions. And those questions may be directed to one or more of the candidates. In order to allow for the most questions possible, candidates need not feel the need to respond to every question unless that question is directed to them. For those of you watching, I remind you that only Forum and League members may ask questions. When we have about 10 minutes left in the hour, I will ask each candidate for a 2-minute closing statement. I will be the timekeeper. I have a stopwatch and I know how to use it. And I will keep the times as much as I can possibly to the times agreed to. With that, let us begin now with our opening statements. Shemia Fagan will have the lead off. Senator Fagan.
Well, thank you and good evening. I am Shemia Fagan, and it's a wonderful honor to be here tonight with the Washington County Public Affairs Forum and the League of Women Voters. You know, I first became aware of politics and democracy and voting growing up in rural Oregon towns in Wasco County. My dad was a staunch Republican and a single parent, raising us 3 kids in the Dalles and Dufur. Our mom was in and out of our lives because she battled drug addiction and homelessness for most of my life. And our dad struggled to make ends meet for raising 3 kids by himself. And the summer before I started 2nd grade, my dad took us on a cool 2-week camping trip. I remember catching crawdads in 8 Mile Creek and sleeping in a big family tent. And many years later, my older brothers told me what had really happened, that we had been evicted from our home in the Dalles and we had nowhere to go, that we were homeless. And that's why I've spent my career as a lawmaker and a civil rights attorney fighting for other Oregon families who are hanging on by a thread, just like my family was. I've passed legislation like paid sick leave and raising the minimum wage, and created the Office of Small Business Assistance in the Secretary of State's office. And I've also worked to knock down barriers to participation in our democracy, from automatic voter registration to expanding vote by mail with prepaid postage. But when I announced my campaign for Secretary of State, I quickly learned that most people have no idea what this job is. One of my older brothers, who's a welder in Umatilla County, said, "Secretary of State, so you'll get other people's coffee?" But this job at its core is about making sure that government works for everybody, from running elections that are fair and secure, auditing state programs and revenues to make sure they're making a real difference in the lives of people who need them most, conducting public records to make sure that our government is open and transparent and accountable. And this year in particular, potentially conducting legislative redistricting, using a People's Commission to ensure that we address systemic inequities and that Oregon embodies that sacred democratic value of equal representation for all. I'm asking for your vote as Secretary of State because I will use the tools of my office and the values of Oregonians to make sure the government works for everybody, especially families hanging on by a thread. As I mentioned earlier, I've seen public services fail, like our broken healthcare system and addiction recovery system that left my mom battling addiction for most of her life, our housing crisis that left my family dipping in and out of homelessness. And I've also seen public services work, like the Oregon public schools that changed the course of my life. As Secretary of State, I get to ensure that government makes a real difference in the lives of everyday Oregonians. My name is Shemia Fagan, and I'm asking for your vote.
Thank you, Ms. Fagan. We go now to Nathalie Paravicini, Dr. Paravicini.
Yes, good afternoon. And thank you very much to the Forum and to the League of Women Voters for having me on this debate. And I'm also very glad to greet both candidates that I have the pleasure of meeting. I am a naturalized citizen, and when I came here as a youth, we also had really rough times. My mom used to clean homes so we could survive. And I have also worked in pain clinics where I saw really the misery of white poor America. And I've worked for clinics for migrant workers. So I'm very close to the suffering of a lot of people. And this is why I'm spending my free time and my resources running for Secretary of State under the Green Party banner. And I'm running because what we're facing now is it's going to require dramatic change like we've never seen before, because climate change is here to stay, and the incremental changes that we're trying to make are just not going to get us anywhere. With the current epidemic and the current fires were all predictable, and they were all predicted. We are going to have more epidemics. The climate is not going to get better. And so we are going to need to, and the economy is going to collapse. It is just not sustainable. Things are changing, and they're going to have to change very fast. And that's why I'm spending my time running for Secretary of State under the Green Party banner. I agree that the Secretary of State has really important roles, particularly electoral reform. We need to implement ranked choice voting and have a wider debate in the political arena. And we also need to, I'm very glad that both other candidates also support a redistricting commission. This is wonderful that we can have this single-mindedness in this. And vote by mail is very secure, so go vote. Encourage everybody to vote. Vote early so you can help others to vote. The deadlines for registration and to receive your ballots are just right upon us, so be active and get your friends to be active. If you really want change, we're going to have to totally review our economic system. It's organized, and the fires this year were a very good example of how we need to come together because this is the only thing that's just going to keep us safe. I'm just going to wait for the questions and at the end in the closing statements.
Thank you for that. We appreciate it. We turn now to Kim Thatcher, Senator Thatcher.
Thank you, Eric. And thanks to the Washington County Public Affairs Forum and League of Women Voters. Always a pleasure. Oregon is at a crossroads. And when I announced my run for Secretary of State, the problems facing the state then, they pale in comparison to what we're facing now. Because now we've had record high unemployment, business closures, months of unrest in the street, massive wildfires displacing thousands of voters. It's clear Oregon's next Secretary of State needs to be a strong, steady leader committed to getting Oregon back on track. Oregon's response to all these challenges will be my top priority. Since I was elected to the House in 2004 and cleared through to my service in the Senate today, my focus has always been on many issues that deal directly with the Secretary of State's office, especially as the longest serving member of the Legislative Audits Committee. The Secretary of State's Audits Division is where hard questions can be answered that can help get Oregon back on track, such as how is it that thousands of unemployed Oregonians have yet to receive their benefits? Thank goodness that's being looked into now. Is Oregon's response to the COVID crisis helping or hurting the state? Is there a better way forward? How do we know that almost $4.5 billion in annual education funding is actually helping students succeed? How can we better manage Oregon's forests and wildfire response? Which brings me to the Elections Division. Ballots get mailed out next week and thousands of mailboxes have burned down recently. I propose ways to help displaced voters, and Oregon's vote by mail has a lot of safeguards in place, but as this disaster shows, I think we can always look for ways to improve. Over the years, I've worked on legislative election issues and committees, and it's time we evaluate our system from top to bottom, from registering to vote to counting all the ballots to ensure we have the highest level of integrity and security. And I commit to these three things in addition. I commit to being a nonpartisan Secretary of State. I won't be putting my thumb on the scale when applying any of the laws pertaining to the office. I will work to restore Oregon's people-driven initiative and referendum process. And finally, I have always been committed to utilizing an independent commission for redistricting, putting people before politicians. So along with my almost 16 years of public sector experience, I've been a small business owner for 28 years. My companies deal with road construction and a lot of moving parts and people and projects. And this experience helps me run the Secretary of State's office, also with lots of moving parts and people and projects. But more importantly, my business experience led me to passing a bill in 2011, which eventually created the Small Business Advocate located in the Secretary of State's office. And it's very clear we need that advocate now to help small businesses get back on their feet.
And we've reached our three-minute point.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. And now we will begin with the candidate questions for each other. Each candidate may ask one question of another candidate. The question candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to the questioning candidate's question, and then the questioning candidate will have a 1-minute rebuttal. And the first question is from Dr. Nathalie Paravicini. Dr. Paravicini, who would you like to ask a question of?
Yes, good afternoon, good evening. My question is for Senator Kim Thatcher. In the other two debates where I participated, she mentioned something about unrest, and I was wondering what she meant by that, because what I have seen at the protest is a lot of very brutal aggression from police officers on protesters. And also, this was also exemplified during the fires. Instead of coming together, we saw misinformation about arsons and arsonists, and then setting up of roadblocks with armed people, which was completely the opposite of what we needed to do to address the fires. So as a Secretary of State, I wanted to ask you, what would you do to make sure that there is no intimidation at the ballot boxes and that the correct information is spread about partisanship and division of the public? Because the safety, not only that, but the trust in elections is very important.
Thank you. 2 minutes, Senator Thatcher.
Okay, thank you. As far as the unrest, yeah, there's been unrest all over our state and it's coming from all directions. I have no qualms about saying that there's been many sides involved. And as far as wildfires, there have been some arsons and they've arrested some people in Southern Oregon for that. I can't speak to them being the main cause of the fires, but there have been some arsons. Roadblocks of armed individuals, wow, that's pretty awful. I don't think that, unless they were trying to protect homes or something, I'm not sure. I don't know the information on that. But as Secretary of State, absolutely no intimidation should belong anywhere near polling places or in people's homes. It should have absolutely no place in a voting. I would hope that if anybody feels intimidated voting at their own kitchen table, that they report that. And that is wrong. And I think that is clearly against the law. And that does need to be reported if that is happening. That is not right. We don't want to have intimidation of voters in any way, shape, or form. Nobody, looking to sway somebody's vote or buy their vote or get anything from them through coercion or any sort of thing. Anything like that needs to be reported, and it should be reported and prosecuted.
Dr. Paravicini, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
Yeah, I just know only one case of arson, and that was by a drug addict, basically. And but the other thing is, so you also do oppose armed people around the ballot boxes, and would you report that, or should I report that?
You have 30 seconds left, Senator Thatcher, if you'd like.
Oh, okay. If somebody's lawfully carrying, that's one thing, but if they're using their guns to try to intimidate, that absolutely should be reported and not put up with, or none of that intimidation should be taking place at any of our elections offices or in people's homes, which are really elections offices right now.
Thank you. Your sound is off.
I beg your pardon. That's an old broadcaster's trick to get your attention. The second question goes to Senator Thatcher. Of whom would you like to ask the question?
I would like to ask Senator Shemia Fagan. Okay. In May, on an interview with KGW TV, you were asked if Oregon needs a new way to conduct redistricting. Your reply was, when it's not broke, don't fix it. Also in May, on Capital Community TV, League of Women Voters, Your Voice Counts, or Your Vote Counts program, you went even further, saying you didn't support the independent redistricting ballot measure, saying the current system in Oregon is working well. The proposal as put forward in this referral is a solution in search of a problem. I don't think we have that problem here in Oregon. So how do you explain making a 180-degree flip and supporting a commission on redistricting? What's the reason for that?
2 minutes,
Right, so
Senator Fagan.
Thank you. I did not support measure, or would have been IP 57 for a simple reason that it was a carbon copy of a measure in California that has failed to meet its diversity and representation goals. The LA Times has reported that essentially California has a lot of older white people who are actually doing the redistricting as opposed to what the entire population of California looks like. So once IP 57 did not qualify for the ballot because it didn't meet the constitutionally required amount of signatures, I do support creating a People's Commission, but that is rooted in equity. As a country that at its first census didn't even count all human beings as full people, as a state that was founded and in our Constitution prohibited formerly enslaved Black Americans from living in our state, it is critical that we don't enshrine in our Constitution a new way of doing redistricting that has been proven other places to not be rooted in racial equity and diversity. And so I am happy and proud to be able to help form a People's Commission that is rooted in racial diversity and equity.
You have about 50 seconds left if you'd like more. Nope. Okay, Senator Thatcher, your 1 minute rebuttal, please.
So I guess I'm trying to figure out how that would work in a place like Eastern Oregon. Are you going to be combining regions just to get a particular racial balance, or are you, how is this supposed to work? Are you trying to keep communities of interest together? Are you trying to pull people from various parts to make a new district that might not even be geographically contiguous?
Senator Fagan, would you like to use your remaining time to answer that?
Certainly, I would encourage Senator Thatcher to review ORS 188.010, which of course is the legal standard for redistricting, and districts are required by law to be contiguous. But more importantly, I would push back on the idea that I believe you implied, which is that rural Oregon is white. I think that the tribes in rural Oregon would push back on that. I believe that the many of the Latinx farm workers who are working very, very hard in our agricultural fields would push back on that. I think that many people of color all throughout our state who have small businesses out in rural Oregon will push back on your implication that rural Oregon is white.
Okay, thank you for that. And now, Senator Fagan, the last question goes to you. Of whom are you going to ask?
Thank you. I'll ask Senator Thatcher a question. Senator Thatcher, you have repeatedly refused to say and come and be honest about who you're voting for as president this year. But we have a president who has repeatedly lied about vote by mail, dismissed condemning white supremacists, including the Proud Boys, a white supremacist group here in Oregon, has refused to say if he'll agree to a peaceful transition of power, because you have said that who the president is or who you're voting for president doesn't relate to the Secretary of State's office. But one of the first things that Secretary of State Dennis Richardson had to do as Secretary of State was refute Trump's claims of voter fraud here in Oregon. You have also attended at least one Trump rally as recently as last month and appeared on stage above a Trump 2020 banner. So can you really tell Oregonians with a straight face that they don't get to know if you're supporting Trump again?
Senator Thatcher, 2 minutes.
Sure, thank you. So I don't believe that a Secretary of State candidate should be weighing in on late to the office. And I do believe that we have a good vote by mail system in place. After having conversations with Dennis Richardson, I am convinced, because he is I've never met anyone more with more integrity than he has. I do think it does need to be looked at from top to bottom just to make sure we keep the best system in place. As far as I am a Republican, and I do appear at events that promote Republican candidates. That does not mean I support or oppose any of those candidates. So as far as, participating in get out the vote efforts for myself and trying to promote my candidacy and encouraging people to vote, which is often what I am doing, that's what's important, is trying to get the vote out. I'm trying to promote my own candidacy, and I show up at lots of different events, including Republican events, and Trump is he's the Republican candidate. So I am showing up at events that are just grassroots, where independents are invited, Democrats are invited, all kinds of events that don't have anything to do with who's for president. I am there to promote my candidacy. And it matters how Oregonians vote. It matters how a Secretary of State will be looking at how sacred their vote is and how important it is. And regardless of whether I disagree or agree with a ballot measure or a candidate, they need to know that their Secretary of State will honor their decisions.
Your time is up. Thank you very much. 1 minute rebuttal, Senator Fagan.
Right. Well, and I've heard these excuses before, but again, I just don't think that anybody can say with a straight face that when you have a president who the New York Times has said, the New Yorker, Susan Glasser, the New Yorker, says has made over 700 false claims about voting, and the Secretary of State in Oregon is the chief elections officer. I think it's very important to Oregonians if you stand with that president and intend to vote for him again. I've been very clear with Oregonians that I am supporting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It sounds to me like Kim is trying to have it both ways, clearly signaling to her base in front of a Trump banner that she's supporting Trump, but then not willing to be telling the rest of us that she is supporting Trump. Kim, if you did at those events actually say publicly, by the way, just because I'm standing in front of a Trump banner doesn't mean I'm supporting him. If that's on video, please do let us know if you actually made it clear to that crowd that you were not actually supporting the person whose banner you were standing in front of.
I don't decorate the stages.
Thank you, ladies. Appreciate it. And now it's time for our members, our forum members, our league members to ask you questions. And we have the first one up from Eric Squires of the Washington County Public Affairs Forum. Mr. Squires, if you would unmute your mic and ask your question, I'd appreciate it. Well, apparently he's not going to, but he did write it down, so I hope I get this right. Question for candidates, and I guess we'll begin with Senator Thatcher on this one and have each of you answer it. Apostille services are apparently limited to the Salem SOS office. Alternately, the SOS expanded remote notarization due to COVID-19. As a candidate, do you think this should remain status quo, or do you offer leadership to change how these services are delivered now? 1 minute answers, please.
Could you please
Senator
repeat
Thatcher?
the first part of it? I did not understand the first part of the sentence.
I'm not sure I do either. It's APOSTILLE services.
Okay.
And if you know what that is, you know more than I do, but then I'm just a reporter. So that's the question. They are limited to the Salem office of the Secretary of State, according to Mr. Squires. Alternately, some Secretary of State expanded remote notarization due to COVID-19. As a candidate, do you think this should remain status quo, or do you offer leadership to change how these services are delivered?
Okay, so official seals and notarial services, yes, we did recently change that to make it online. So that, you know, with the COVID shutdown, it was very difficult to get people together. So it was much more convenient to do that. We need to make it easier. There are other states that put this in place long before COVID was a thing. And I think we can look at expanding the online services and making, you know, not just limited to the Salem office, is what I think you said. And, you know, making sure that we make things more convenient for people to conduct business. So yes.
Thank you for that. And I've had a request that Heidi Oliver please mute her mic. Thank you. Senator Fagan, we'll go to you on this question next.
Yeah, so apostille services are different than notary. They essentially are in layman's terms, they're kind of the verification of a notary. And currently, even though we have online notary services, which were just put out by the Secretary of State, which I, of course, do support as somebody who has to use a notary in my legal practice. I'm very happy to have an online notary. Apostille services still require you to either go to Salem or actually send those documents to Salem. And I'm glad that it looks like Mr. Squires asked this question, because I was recently at a forum talking to small business owners, and one of them, which is one of the great reasons just to listen to regular everyday people, he had an idea saying, hey, why don't we have maybe a mobile unit that goes into kind of different areas to allow small businesses to not, if you need something very quickly that you can't have time to send it all the way to Salem, but having a mobile unit that maybe once a week goes to certain areas so that small businesses can actually just go down, have that apostille certification done, and then get that back.
Thank you. Dr. Paravicini.
Yes, I think that COVID showed that there is a new way possible to do business in general. As a doctor, I can tell you that everybody has shifted to telemedicine and to the relief of many people. So I agree, we need to bring more mobile services and make things more accessible in the extremities, not so centralized. And things are here to stay, the changes in the economy.
Thank you. I'm seeing a lot of commentary in the chat room, but not a lot of questions. So the League of Women Voters and the forum did come up with a few questions. And Senator Fagan, we'll start with you on this next one, if you don't mind. As you know, the Secretary of State is next in line if something were to happen to Oregon's governor. How prepared are you to take on the role of governor if called upon to do so? And do you think Oregon should consider creating the position of lieutenant governor? 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Well, I am proud to be endorsed by the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association. And I think it's very important that this question got asked because candidates who are running for Secretary of State, but who say their views on other issues aren't important, I think are just trying to hide their views on other issues because, of course, it is important for somebody who's running to serve as Oregon's lieutenant governor is clear to Oregonians about positions they have that are even go beyond the Secretary of State's specific duties. And this question came to me recently about whether or not the Secretary of State should be nonpartisan. And I said, if we had a separate lieutenant governor, but I have served on a school board in the Oregon House, in the Oregon Senate, and I've consistently fought for working people all across this state. And I would be very proud as a kid who grew up in Dufur, Oregon. It obviously is a flattering even thought to serve as Oregon's governor. I'm really looking forward to serving as Oregon's Secretary of State. But certainly if called upon to serve as Oregon's governor, I have the experience and the breadth of experience to serve in that position and really promote the values of Oregonians.
Thank you. Dr. Paravicini, your answer, please.
Could you briefly summarize the question again?
Sure. As you know, the Secretary of State is next in line if something were to happen to Oregon's governor. How prepared are you to take on the role of governor if called upon to do so? Do you think Oregon should consider creating the position of lieutenant governor?
I don't think at this moment it is necessary to have the lieutenant governor. And really as a Secretary of State, what's really important in any large organization, especially an important organization like the Secretary of State, is to have integrity and to be able to establish a culture of trust and value of the people who are doing the work. So you set up a culture at the top and you provide the resources, the training to the people who work with you. I don't have a large business, but I have run large campaigns, and that's what you need to have good people and know how to create a culture that will get things done with goals and targets.
Thank you. Senator Thatcher.
Thank you. Yes, I'm prepared. I think it would be a very unusual combination of events that would lead to that, especially if I was the Secretary of State. It'd be much more likely that if Biden were to win, that I would imagine Governor Brown would, be flattered to accept a position with his administration, but that would much more likely to be followed through with if one of my opponents were to win. As far as the lieutenant governor, that was bantied about several times during session by former Representative Lim while I was there, and he was a senator before that, and that was his bill. He wanted that, and that just didn't go anywhere in the legislature, and that included a Republican legislature as well as a Democrat legislature. It's mostly a figurehead position. I've only seen 3 times in our Oregon history where the Secretary of State has succeeded to the role of governor.
Thank you for that. I see in the chat room that we do have a question from Jill Litzinger. Would she unmute her mic, please?
Yeah.
You can ask your question now, please.
Okay. You have accepted a donation from the governor. How would you have the best interest in Oregon? This is for Shemia Fagan, sorry. For Oregon, when we have tried to recall her at least 3 times that I know of. So how would you have the best interest in Oregon also by accepting a $5,000 or $50,000 donation from her?
Eric, this is Brad Avaki, and I just want to make sure that the person asking that question is a league or a for a forum member, if she doesn't mind stating which organization she's a member of.
Ms. Litzinger, could you answer the question?
I'm not part of a league. I'm just part of the Republican Party.
In the interest of full transparency, I'm happy to answer the question either way. I don't want her to feel, I understand the rules, but if this is a one-time mulligan, I'm happy to answer her question.
All right, I'll give you a minute to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm proud to be supported by a broad coalition in this race, including Governor Kate Brown and 3 former secretaries of state. You know, I first set foot in the Secretary of State's office as a freshman lawmaker when Kate Brown was then Secretary of State, and I joined her and other voting rights advocates as we mapped out a path to becoming the first state in the nation to pass automatic voter registration. So we then and do now share a goal of making it easier for Oregonians to participate in our democracy. But I think what you're really asking is, will I be independent when I audit state agencies? Absolutely. I have a very strong track record of standing up for what I believe in, even when I disagree with my own party. I joined the Senate after defeating an incumbent Democrat who was in Senate leadership. I worked with Republicans over the objections of the 3 most powerful Democrats in the Senate to enter Oregon into the National Popular Vote Compact. I have been the lone no vote in my party on more than one occasion, and in citing my independence from my own party in my primary campaign, the Bend Bulletin endorsed me by writing, quote, Shemia Fagan has a track record of being straight with Oregonians when things are not working as they should. I think that says it all.
Thank you. And in fairness, I think we ought to give Dr. Paravicini and Senator Thatcher an opportunity to talk about audits. What would you do as the Chief's Auditor of the state of Oregon? Senator Thatcher, I'll start with you.
I want to turn over rocks and see what I find. I want to make sure that we're holding our government accountable and we are putting forth the best way of doing things and serving Oregonians and spending money in the best possible way. And that is something that I feel like the former Secretary of State Dennis Richardson did very well at, and just reaching out and listening to people across the state, seeing what they feel really needs to be looked into and doing it, even if it didn't seem like a quote Republican thing to do, to look into racial equity issues at the Portland Public Schools or clean air issues at the DEQ. He was listening to people, and that's what I want to carry on in that tradition. But I also want to look at some of the challenges that we're facing right now and see if there's a better way forward and try to get our state back on track.
Thank you for that. Dr. Paravicini, how would you approach the role as Chief Auditor?
I think that the audits need to be made with wisely. I think both the other candidates also agree that the employment division needs to be audited in the way that the checks were issued. Something didn't work right. The Oregon Health Authority also had recently debacle implementing computer systems. But I would also look for departments like, for example, the crimes lab, where we can find maybe exonerate people who are incarcerated unjustly, which would in turn save the state a lot of money in prison-related issues, right? Aside from the moral thing to do. So I would focus the audits by productivity and effectiveness for the people of Oregon.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll move on to a question from Becky Gladstone. If she is on, would she please identify herself and tell us which organization she belongs to?
Hi there. Thank you. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Oregon. I'm the state president, and I would like to know the candidates' thoughts, their positions on managing the Elliott Forest as a member of the State Land Board. Thank you. Prospective members.
Thank you. Dr. Paravicini, we'll start with you on that one.
Yes, so as some people may know, the Elliott Forest is the last largest coastal old growth forest, and it is vital to preserve it as that. To sell it, the advisory committee for the Save the Elliott Forest met recently, and it does not look very good. OSU appears to want to dispose of the forest and replant. And the fires have shown that the forests burn much hotter and are much more destructive when it is plantation forests. So the Save the Elliott, or not the Save, yes, Save the Elliott. The Elliott Forest needs to remain an old growth. It cannot be clear cut and replanted. It is an old growth and it needs to be preserved as that. And any effort to underdo that, to destroy this last important a carbon sink is going to be running counter any effort to contain fires or climate change.
Thank you for that. Senator Thatcher.
Well, yeah, there's been some controversy over that. It's costing the state money to manage it because of some of the judicial decisions, and it's just it has to remain in state hands. So there is a proposal for OSU to turn it into a research forest. I know that they've been working on this really for a long time, and they're working really hard on it. Whether that's the best choice, I don't know. I've got to hear from the folks that are affected by it, as well as the people making the proposal. And I just think that we need to make better decisions when it comes to running our state lands. We need to maybe look at what our goals, maybe give a fresh look to what our goals are, because they're kind of vaguely written in statute right now and in the Constitution. So it's not super clear on the direction that one is supposed to take. I think it'd be good to reevaluate.
Thank you for that. Senator Fagan.
Yeah, well, first off, I think it's very clear the role of the state land board. It's the governor and the treasurer and the secretary of state under Oregon's constitution who make up the state land board. And with respect to the Elliott Forest, let me state unequivocally that I would oppose selling it to any private companies for logging. That is why I'm proud to be endorsed by the Sierra Club and the Oregon League of Conservation Voters. And I do think it's important that as one of 3 members of the land board, that Oregon's next Secretary of State shares the conservation values of Oregonians. The decision of whether or not to essentially sell the Elliott from the Common School Fund back to the state of Oregon for it to be used by Oregon State University as a research forest will actually go before the land board this fall. So it's quite possible that decision might already be made by the time the next Secretary of State takes office. But I will say that if I was on the state lands board right now, I'll be transparent and say that I would support that proposal. It's been under, to the extent that it's been discussed, it's been under consideration for a long time, and it meets a lot of the goals. Number one, it will keep the forest publicly owned.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm looking at a question. I just saw it here. Tracy Basile, will she unmute her mic, please?
Hello.
Hello, are you a member of the league or the forum?
No.
Okay, well then we'll have to move on. A question that I have from the League of Women Voters, Oregon's vote by mail system is the oldest in the nation. It's a model for other states. Will part of your job include urging other states to adopt vote by mail processes that we have perfected over the years? Senator Thatcher, I'll begin with you.
Yes. We've done a good job putting a lot of safeguards in place. And I would say that we've got the longest, obviously, we've got the longest experience in doing that. That's what's part of the question, but Oregon does a good job.
Thank you. Senator Fagan, your answer, please.
Well, I'm first off, I'm happy to hear Senator Thatcher say that 4 years ago when she was asked about our vote by mail system, she said it was plagued. So I'm glad to know that that is something that has changed, because people can, of course, change their minds. And I'm glad to know that's a mind change. Yes, I think that vote by mail is the safest, most accessible way for people to vote. The reality is that we are voting in the midst of a pandemic, and you compare places like Wisconsin or Kentucky with folks standing in line with masks in the cold, with umbrellas, trying to wait to vote. And then you obviously have folks in Oregon sitting in the comfort of with their own family, with their own home, filling out a ballot a week or so before Election Day, and then swinging that by a drop box or dropping that in the mail. And so I think that it's important that folks realize that our vote by mail system, it has been around for over 20 years. I've actually never voted any other way, but we can now take what we know and actually encourage other states, which many of other states, of course, do vote by mail, including our neighboring Utah and Washington.
Thank you for that. Dr. Paravicini.
Yes, I think that voting by mail is a way to go. It is very safe and it is very convenient, and it makes it easier for elderly people, those who are in rural areas or who have less accessibility to vote and exert their right to vote. If we can buy stuff online, and if we can by mail, we can certainly vote by mail.
Thank you for that. We have time for about one more question, and I don't see any in the chat room, so we have one from the League. Although we are very fortunate indeed to have online voter registration, vote by mail, and automatic voter registration in Oregon, natural disasters and cyber attacks have the potential to seriously impact an election. What would you recommend in the way of any changes to make Oregon's election system more resilient and secure? Senator Fagan, we'll start with you.
Well, first off, I'm very proud here in Oregon that we have paper ballots, paper trail for all of our ballots. We have forensic signature verification. We have unique barcode tracking systems. And so in terms of our actual elections being hacked, that isn't a concern. Our counting machines are not connected to the internet. However, our most vulnerable place is our online voter registration system, which there's been an audit that showed that there are vulnerabilities there. And that will be on my first at the top of my to-do list if I'm honored to serve as Secretary of State. In terms of folks who are displaced, I think the thing they need most right now is not politicians scaring them into believing they won't have a right to vote. Oregon's vote by mail system has had them covered for 20 years. If folks listening to this have been displaced either by wildfires or COVID or any other reason, please visit oregonvotes.org/myvote, and you can literally have your ballot sent anywhere in the world, even if it's not somewhere you're living, but you know a friend who you can swing by their house and pick up your ballot, or send it to work, or send it to any identifiable location. Oregon's vote by mail system has you covered.
Thank you for that. Dr. Paravicini.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat real quick the question? Oh, this.
We're talking about making our elections more secure. How are you going to do that as Secretary of State?
I agree that we have paper trail, and that's probably the safest things that we can do. If we wanted to put it the other way further, we can change to open source software. But I think that right now, as Ms. Fagan says, making sure that the people who are displaced feel comfortable to vote by mail or in person, or getting their ballots at oregonvotes.org/myvote. I think that they should, and that's the most important to make our democracy safe.
Thank you for that. Justin Breck has his or her hand raised.
I didn't answer the question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Thatcher. Please answer the question.
Well, I have visited with many of these displaced people from these wildfires, and they don't know where they're going to be from one day to the next, and they're just trying to live life. We need to make it easier. We need to make sure that the information is getting out to voters, and that they don't have to figure out, how to get their ballot on top of it all. It should be made a little bit easier. They don't necessarily know where they're going to be. Yes, there are processes in place. If they're close to a county clerk's office, they can pick up a ballot. If they're close to, not plagued by having to, go around a closed road and get to their county clerk, great, or get to a county clerk, then great, that works out. And if they can change their address, if they know where they're going to be, or where they can pick up a ballot by October 13th. Beyond that, I don't know that they have a lot of choices, but I do want to make it easier. And I think that this shows one of those vulnerabilities, and that we do need to figure out a better way forward for these people.
Thank you. I guess we do have time for one more. Justin Breck has his hand raised, or her hand raised. Would you please ask your question and identify yourself?
Yeah. I have a question for Senator Fagan. She voted for Senate Bill 761, and that limited personally printed copies of initiative petitions, and the Oregonian labeled it as a bill that smacks of voter suppression. Is that something she regrets, or she would vote again for?
We'll find out.
Well, the bill you're referring to was actually closing loopholes. There was widespread allegations of people just printing out stacks of e-sheets and sticking them on counters at gun stores, where people thought that people might want to sign certain petitions, but not even including the actual the actual measure, which is a requirement. When folks are out gathering signatures, they are required to have the actual text of the measure with them. And in the information age where we're having misinformation spread all over, it was simply a closing of a loophole to actually secure our initiative and referendum system against people fraudulently getting folks to sign on to initiative petitions and not actually knowing what they were signing on to.
Senator Thatcher, Dr. Paravicini, would you like to take a shot at that question?
Well, the information is already on these voter sheets. The single signature sheets already have to be printed with all the voter captions, or the ballot initiative, the captions, the yes vote, the result of a yes vote, the result of a no vote, all that sort of information that's been vetted, already has to be there. And if it's online, the information is online, and then they can print out their sheet. Anyway, it's been made pretty much effectually void now, because it is so difficult to try to thread the needle and trying to make sure you're obeying the law on all of these initiatives, that they're just being recommended not to use that single signature sheet except under really tight circumstances, and it just makes it more difficult for things to get on the ballot. And that's what happened to Initiative Petition 57, that was not able to get on the ballot, I think, because of that restriction in what has been shown to be highly valid signatures.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Paravicini?
You know, I have collective signatures for petitions, and I've always had to print the actual wording of the initiative or the proposal separately. So I'm not sure that it's printed with the petition form itself, because I've had to do it, and they come separate. So I think that that's what maybe Ms. Fagan was referring to. You're muted.
Another senior moment, my apologies. We have arrived at that point now where we are going to have our closing statements, 2 minutes each. Senator Thatcher, we will begin with you.
Well, I just want to talk about one thing. When I said plagued, it was a little bit out of context. It was a snapshot in time. There were some problems with some ballots being sent out mistakenly. They were supposed to be independent party ones, but they sent out Democrat Party ones. And so at a snapshot in time, I said that the entire nation should not be pushed into adopting Oregon's plagued vote by mail system, when clearly this should be a decision made by individual states. And so definitely want to have safe and secure elections. I think that it's clear that voters have a big choice. I've been in my community a very long time. I've raised my family here, established 2 long-standing businesses. My main opponent, has only served a couple of terms in the House, left that district, moved to another, served in the Senate, only served a half a term now, is running for a higher office. She's never run a business. I've weathered economic storms in the legislature and in the private sector, and made hard policy decisions and cuts over the last 16 years. And I believe that the Secretary of State has nonpartisan duties and would act as such if elected. My opponent appears to be pushing a very partisan agenda, with Democrat for Secretary of State on her lawn signs. And in the primary, she repeatedly said in numerous public appearances, she believed the Secretary of State would be best served in the hands of a Democrat. This is a significant race, and it's about the future of Oregon for the next 10 years or so. And it doesn't matter how you vote, but that you vote. The most important thing you own, the most valuable thing you own, is your vote. And there are big differences. I have the experience, I have relevant experience. I'm Kim Thatcher. I hope to earn your vote this November. Check out more at kimthatcher.com.
Thank you, Senator Thatcher. Senator Fagan, you have 2 minutes for a closing statement.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. And elections are about choices. And in this race, Oregonians have a clear choice between Senator Thatcher and myself in 2 very different visions. One candidate who has a voting record expanding voting access, and one who has voted lockstep with her party to restrict it. One candidate who has been transparent about what I stand for and who I'm supporting in this upcoming election, and one who will only signal that to members of her base. And one candidate who will stand up to lies about Oregon's vote by mail system, and one who stays silent while the president undermines the integrity of our democracy. So there is a clear choice, and many of our neighbors have already decided. I'm very proud to be endorsed for Secretary of State by the American Postal Workers Union, the workers who've been delivering our paychecks, our birthday cards, our life-sustaining prescriptions, and our ballots for decades. I'm proud to be endorsed by Senators Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley, two men who Oregonians have been proud to send as Oregon's representatives to the United States Senate. The Oregon League of Conservation Voters, grassroots folks dedicated to preserving our clean air, clean water, and addressing the devastating impacts of climate change in our forests. Planned Parenthood PAC, everyday folks who are making sure that our democratic freedoms include reproductive freedoms. The Oregon State Firefighters Council, the Oregon Education Association, the Oregon Nurses Association, and so many other of our heroes who are on the front line serving Oregon families today and every day. But I'm not done. Not until I can add you. So you can learn more or contact me at shemiafororegon.com. I'm Shemia Fagan, and I would be honored to earn your vote this November or this October, whenever your family sits down to safely vote from home here in Oregon.
Thank you, Senator Fagan. And now we turn for the last word to Dr. Paravicini.
Yes, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank again the Forum and the League of Women Voters. And I think that one of the candidates is particularly qualified. And so if you want to send, and we'll probably win. So if you really want to send a message, vote green, because both parties represent a lot of corporate interests. Like, for example, the CARES Act passed $12 billion to bail out the oil industry, but we never heard about it, when it is actually the oil industry who's creating all of these climate change and pandemics. So if you want to send a real message that we want ranked choice voting, real and meaningful electoral reform, campaign finance reform, and we also want investment not in our military, but investment in our infrastructure. If our infrastructure were modern and well maintained, many of the fires would not have happened, because I think it was up to 13 or 15% of the 35 fires were linked to faulty infrastructure and transmission lines. If we had investment in our rural communities, we wouldn't have to extract and destroy our environment and destroy the environment that these rural communities have to live in, while they get impoverished because of severance credits and tax giveaways to large corporations, particularly timber industry in Oregon. And both Democratic and Republican representatives have received a lot of money from the timber industry. Oregon has one of the most lax campaign finance laws in the country, and it is very well known that campaigns here are very expensive because of that. So if you really want to send a message, vote Green Party, vote Nathalie Paravicini for SOS.org, and vote also for the Green Party for Howie Hawkins and Angela Davis in Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all three candidates. This was a very interesting and very telling debate, and I apologize for my momentary lapses, but when you get to be my age, you're entitled to a few of them. I would also like to thank Brad Avakian and Kathleen Hersh from the League of Women Voters and the Washington County Public Affairs Forum. I'm Eric Schmidt. Vote. That's all I can say. Vote. Thanks for watching.